The Dougie Center in Portland, Oregon has developed 6 basic principles about children and grief. Number 1, grief is a natural reaction to loss. Children need to grieve. When a person dies, those who are impacted by the death of the experience of grief. This is true for infants through adults. Although grief may vary from person to person, grief does not feel natural, partly because we cannot always control our response or experience. Since being out of control, and who wants to be out of control, may be overwhelming and frightening, yet grief is natural, normal, and healthy. Number 2, each person's grief is unique. While many theories of the grieving process may provide a helpful framework for understanding grief, the path itself is a lonely, solitary, and unique for every individual. No book, article, or grief therapist can predict or prescribe exactly what child, a teen, or adult, or should go through that experience. Those who wish to assist people in grief do best by walking with them in the role of a listener and learner, allowing the griever to teach them about his or her unique way grief in the grief journey. Wolfe calls this companioning, that is, walking with the grieving child on their own journey. Number 3, there is no right or wrong way to grieve. Coping with death does not follow a defined pattern or set of rules. There is no right or wrong way to grieve. There are, however, helpful and unhelpful choices and behaviors. Some choices and behaviors are constructive, life-affirming actions, while others may be destructive and harmful, causing long-term complications. Because the sheer pain of loss often feels crazy, it may be challenging to decide which thoughts, feelings, and actions are helpful and which are not. Usually, grieving children get plenty of advice from others about what they should do, feel, think, and believe following a death. What they usually need more than advice is a non-judgmental listening ear, helping them sort through the options and alternatives. Number 4 is every death is different and will be experienced in different ways. While children commonly react in different ways to the death of a parent, a sibling, or other relative or friend, it makes sense. Each relationship meets different needs and is uniquely personal. Some of the grief literature talks about loss on almost a competitive way, as if some losses are worse than others. You may read that the death of a child is the worst loss, or that suicide is the hardest to get over. Comparisons about which death is the worst are not helpful and may lead to unrealistic expectations or demands. While an individual may speak for himself or herself about he or she experiences, one cannot categorically say that any loss is worse than or easier than another. Within a family, each person may grieve very differently too. For example, one family member may want to talk, another may want to cry all the time, another may want to be alone. This can create additional stress and difficulty with an already stressed out family. Each child's way should be honored on his or her own way of coping. The 5th principle is the grieving process is influenced by a multitude of issues. We must remember there are many issues impacting how one reacts to a death. Some of these may include the strength of the social support system available, the family, friends, community, schools, peers, the nature of death and how the griever interprets that, whether or not there was unfinished business between the griever and the person who has died. The previous nature of that relationship and emotional and developmental age of the griever are other issues that they must deal with. And the sixth and final developmental principle is grief never ends. It's something you never get over. Too often in the past, grief has been understood in a medical model. It was treated like a disease. Being cured of grief was the goal, and to be healed and get well meant to overcome the disease. This is perhaps one of the least understood aspects of grief in our society. It seems most people are anxious for us to put the loss behind us, to go on and get over it. When a significant person dies, his or her death leaves a vacuum, a big hole in the lives of those left behind. Life is never the same again. This doesn't mean life can never be joyful or that the experience of loss cannot be transformed into something positive. But grief does not have a magical ending time. People report that pangs of loss and pain or grief 40, 50, or 60 years after the death is still apparent.